The 911 dispatcher's voice was calm, but the voice on the other end of the line was pure panic. It was my wife, Amelia, screaming that a man was having some kind of allergic reaction, that he couldn't breathe, that his eyes were swollen shut. "Please hurry," she shrieked. "He just collapsed." I listened to the recording for the 10th time, my finger hovering over the replay button. The police had played it for me just an hour ago. They didn't know I was the reason for that call. They didn't know the allergic reaction was a lie. And they certainly didn't know that the chaos, the sirens, and the trip to the emergency room all started with a simple bottle of perfume. My name is Frank Miller. I'm 48 years old, and for the last 25 years, I've taught high school chemistry. My life is built on rules, on formulas, on the simple, predictable fact that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. I lived in a quiet house on a quiet street with my wife of 2 decades, Amelia. I thought our life was a stable compound, a bond that couldn't be broken. I believed in the chemistry between us. But I, a man who could see the invisible reactions between molecules, was completely blind to the one happening right under my own roof. It started subtly, as most decay does. Amelia, who worked in real estate, began having more and more late nights with clients. Then came the new scent. It was a perfume I'd never smelled before, a heavy, expensive floral scent that was completely unlike her usual light, citrusy one. It clung to her clothes, to her hair, to the pillows on our bed. When I asked about it, she just smiled and said it was a gift from a grateful client. I wanted to believe her. I loved my wife. I loved the simple, predictable life we had built. So I chose to ignore the evidence. The truth, when it came, wasn't a slow burn. It was an explosion. One evening, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. A message lit up the screen. It wasn't from a client. It was from a man named Julian, and the message was simple: "Can't stop thinking about tonight. The smell of you is still on my skin." In that moment, the solid floor beneath my feet turned to dust. The air in my lungs turned to poison. The man who understood chemical reactions felt a chain reaction in his own heart, a complete and catastrophic breakdown of everything he'd ever known. That perfume became my personal hell. It was the scent of my failure, the smell of another man on my wife. I learned from her credit card statement that a single bottle cost over $400. It was a price that screamed guilt gift. It sat on her vanity, a beautiful, crystal bottle full of ugly secrets. I would stare at it for hours, this symbol of my replacement. She would spritz it on her neck and wrists before going out for another late night with clients, and the scent would linger long after she was gone, mocking me in the silence of our home. One night, while staring at that bottle, an idea began to form in the cold, logical part of my brain that was still functioning. As a chemistry teacher, I knew all about chemicals. I knew about irritants, about catalysts, and about reactions. In the locked chemical cabinet in my school's prep room, there was a canister of oleoresin capsicum, the active ingredient in pepper spray. It was a potent, inflammatory agent. An oil-based liquid. With the right care, it could be transferred. The action was forming in my mind, and I knew exactly what the reaction would be. The process was methodical. I wore gloves. I worked with the precision of a surgeon. I carefully siphoned the expensive perfume out of her crystal bottle and poured it down the drain. Then, I took the pepper spray. I knew a direct application would be too obvious, too harsh. I diluted it slightly with an oil solution to match the consistency of the perfume. I made sure the color was a close match. Then, using a tiny funnel, I filled the beautiful bottle with my ugly creation. I polished the bottle until it shined, screwed the top back on, and placed it exactly where I had found it. It looked perfect. The next evening, Amelia was getting ready to go out. Just a quick dinner with the girls from the office, she lied, her eyes not quite meeting mine. I watched her from the doorway of our bedroom. My heart was a stone in my chest. I watched as she picked up the bottle. I watched as she spritzed the invisible poison onto her neck. She did it twice, a little extra for her special night. She smiled at her reflection, completely unaware. She turned to me and blew me a kiss. "Don't wait up," she said, and walked out the door, carrying the scent of my revenge with her. I sat alone in the quiet house for what felt like an eternity. Every passing car was them, returning. Every creak of the house was my own sanity cracking. Then, 2 hours later, my phone rang. A blocked number. I answered. It wasn't Amelia. It was a man, screaming, gasping for air. "What did she do?" he choked out between violent coughs. "Her perfume, it's in my eyes. I can't breathe." In the background, I could hear Amelia's panicked voice yelling my name. And then, I heard the man whisper one final, terrifying thing before the line went dead, "Frank. I'm coming for you. If you were in my position, betrayed and broken, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below, and please, tell me where in the world you're watching from. The support means everything. Make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is only the beginning, and the reaction to what I've done is about to get a whole lot bigger. The call ended, but the silence that followed was louder than the screams. I sat frozen in my armchair, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to a dead line. "Frank. I'm coming for you." The words echoed in the empty house. How did he know my name? Amelia must have been screaming it in her panic. But the threat wasn't panicked. It was a low, raspy whisper, a promise delivered through a throat raw with pain. A dark, twisted part of me felt a surge of victory. The reaction had occurred exactly as I had planned. But the scientist in me knew that some reactions create byproducts you can't predict. And I had just created a very dangerous one. For the next hour, I was a ghost in my own home. Every shadow seemed to move, every floorboard creak was the sound of his approach. I checked the locks on the doors 3 times. I peered through the blinds into the dark, empty street. Was he out there? Was he already on his way? The satisfaction I had felt was quickly souring into a thick, cold dread. I had wanted revenge, but I had no plan for what came after. What happens when your revenge starts breathing down your neck? I had poked a monster, and now I was waiting for it to roar. Have you ever had a memory so happy that it hurts to remember it? As I stood there, paralyzed by fear, my mind flashed back 20 years. I saw Amelia and me, young and laughing, painting the walls of this very living room. We were covered in yellow paint, exhausted but so full of hope. We were building a life, a future, a stable compound. That memory, once a source of warmth, now felt like a shard of glass in my heart. It was a reminder of the beautiful thing I had lost, and the ugly thing I had just become in its place. The sound of a car door slamming shut outside sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. I flattened myself against the wall, my heart hammering. But it was Amelia. She burst through the door, her face pale and streaked with tears. She didn't look angry, she looked terrified. She ran to me and collapsed into my arms, sobbing. "Frank, it was horrible," she cried. "Julian, he couldn't breathe. He said it was my perfume. He thinks he's allergic." She was holding me, her husband, seeking comfort while crying for her lover. And I had to stand there and hold her back. My mind was racing as I tried to play the part of the concerned husband. I rubbed her back and murmured comforting words, but inside I was a storm of conflicting emotions. I felt a cold satisfaction hearing her describe his pain, but her own fear and grief for him were a fresh betrayal that cut me deeper than the first. Do you know how hard it is to comfort someone when you are the secret cause of their pain? I felt like a complete monster, yet a part of me whispered that she deserved this, that they deserved this. What would you have done in my place? Who is this Julian, Amelia? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Her answer knocked the air from my lungs. He's Julian Croft, she whispered, her voice muffled by my shirt. His father is Robert Croft. Robert Croft. The superintendent of the Northwood School District. My boss's boss. The man who held my entire career, my reputation, and my pension in the palm of his hand. This wasn't just an affair with some random man. This was a catastrophe. My quiet, calculated revenge had the potential to burn down every single part of my life, professionally and personally. I felt a wave of nausea. This was so much bigger than I had ever imagined. A simple act of marital revenge had just become a direct attack on the son of the most powerful man in my career. What would you do if you realized your revenge could cost you everything you've ever worked for? Is any act of getting even worth that kind of risk? I was in way over my head, and the water was rising fast. This open loop, this connection to my job, was a variable I had never planned for. The doctors, they were so confused, Amelia continued, pulling away from me to wipe her eyes. They ran all kinds of tests, but they couldn't figure out what caused such a violent reaction. It didn't present like a normal allergy. My blood ran cold. I knew what was coming next. They said it was so unusual that they had to send a sample of the perfume to a special lab for analysis. They even took the bottle as evidence. A ticking time bomb. That's what I had created. And the clock was counting down to my own destruction. I finally got Amelia to calm down and go upstairs to bed, her body exhausted from the drama. I stayed downstairs, the silence of the house pressing in on me again. I was staring out the window, my mind a blank slate of panic, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text from a blocked number. My thumb trembled as I opened it. It was a picture. A clear, high-quality photo of the front of my house, taken from a car parked directly across the street. The picture had been taken just moments ago, the lamp on my porch was clearly visible. My heart stopped. Below the picture, there was a single word. A promise. Soon. He was out there. Right now. Watching me. The monster wasn't just roaring anymore. It was on my doorstep. The image of my own house on my phone's screen felt like a violation. He wasn't just threatening me, he was showing me that he owned my space, that he could see me when I couldn't see him. My home, my one place of safety in a world that had turned upside down, was suddenly a glass box. I dropped to the floor, crawling away from the window, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The satisfaction of my revenge was completely gone, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of pure fear. I had set a fire, and now the flames were licking at my own front door. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark living room, watching the street through a tiny gap in the blinds. Every passing headlight, every rustle of leaves in the wind, was him. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My wife's lover, who she was with when he had a mysterious medical emergency, is sending me scary pictures. I was trapped in a prison of my own making. Taking justice into your own hands sounds brave and powerful, but it leaves you utterly alone. There is no one you can call for help when your own crime is the reason you are in danger. The next morning, I had to pretend to be a normal man. I had to put on my teacher clothes, get in my car, and drive to Northwood High. The familiar drive felt alien. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see the black car from the picture. The school hallways, usually a place of comfort, now felt like a maze filled with unseen threats. Was Julian's father, the superintendent, watching me on the security cameras? Did he already know? Every smiling student, every friendly colleague, felt like a potential spy in a war I was silently fighting. My paranoia spiked when I was called to the principal's office. I thought, this is it. It's over. But my principal, Mr. Harrison, just wanted to introduce me to someone. Frank, this is Dr. Evelyn Reed, he said. She was a new student counselor, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through the polite, teacherly smile I had plastered on my face. Dr. Reed is here to help with student stress, he explained. But as she shook my hand, her gaze lingered a little too long. It felt less like a greeting and more like an analysis. Was she really just a counselor? Walking back to my classroom, I saw a young couple, two of my senior students, holding hands by the lockers, whispering and laughing. The sight of their simple, innocent affection sent me spiraling back in time. I remembered my 20th anniversary with Amelia. I had booked a table at our favorite restaurant. I bought flowers. I waited for 2 hours. She finally called, her voice rushed, saying a last-minute real estate deal had come up. I remember saying, I understand, even though every part of me knew it was a lie. Have you ever ignored a huge red flag in a relationship, just hoping it would go away? I wonder why we lie to ourselves like that. I was in the middle of teaching a lesson about chemical volatility, how certain substances can spread through the air, unseen, when my blood turned to ice. I glanced out my classroom window, which faced the street in front of the school. And there it was. The same black car from the picture. It was parked across the street, partially hidden by a tree. It was just sitting there, a silent predator watching its prey. He wasn't just watching my home. He was watching my work. He was showing me that there was nowhere I could go where he couldn't find me. The car was gone by the time school ended. A small part of me hoped I had imagined it, that the paranoia was making me see things. But as I walked to my car in the near-empty parking lot, my phone buzzed. Another text from the blocked number. This one had no picture, just 5 chilling words that made my stomach clench. I know about the lab. Tick-tock. He knew. He knew the perfume bottle was being tested. He was telling me that my time was running out. He wasn't just trying to scare me, he was enjoying it. When I got home, Amelia was waiting for me. The fear and confusion from the night before were gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look I had never seen before. The police called, she said, her voice flat. They wanted to confirm my statement from the hospital. They asked some strange questions, Frank. She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. They asked if Julian had any enemies. They asked if you had any reason to be angry with him. The open loop was closing, the trap was springing, and I was the one caught in it. The final blow came without warning. The ER doctor called me back, too, she said, watching my face intently. He said the preliminary lab results are in. It wasn't an allergic reaction. He said Julian has severe chemical burns in his throat and on his corneas. The doctor used the term aerosolized caustic agent. She let the technical words hang in the air between us, words a real estate agent would have no reason to know unless she had looked them up. She looked me dead in the eye, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. Frank, you teach chemistry. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? My wife's question hung in the air between us, sharp and heavy as a guillotine. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? For a split second, the truth was on the tip of my tongue. But then I saw her eyes, filled not with concern for me, but with a cold, calculating suspicion. She wasn't my partner anymore. She was a potential witness. So, I did the only thing I could do. I lied. I let my face crumble into a mask of shock and hurt. Amelia, my God, I whispered, my voice cracking. How could you ask me that? You really think I'm capable of something so monstrous? I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes, so I pressed my advantage. I used the science she didn't understand as both a shield and a weapon. An aerosolized caustic agent? That could be 1,000 things. A contaminated bottle from the factory, a chemical reaction with his cologne, a rare component in the perfume itself. We don't know what he was exposed to before he met you. I was building a wall of reasonable doubt around myself, brick by brick. She backed down, for now. But the trust between us was completely gone. We were two strangers living in the same house, breathing the same air, each wondering what secrets the other was hiding. The next day at school was torture. Every time the PA system crackled to life, I expected to be called to the principal's office. Every student who looked at me for a second too long seemed to know my secret. I ran into the new counselor, Dr. Reed, in the hallway. She smiled at me, a polite but knowing smile. "Chemistry is so fascinating, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice light. "It's amazing how a perfectly stable compound can become dangerously explosive with just one wrong element introduced." It was a simple observation, but it felt like a surgical strike. Was she just making conversation, or was she telling me she knew I was the wrong element? The lie I told Amelia felt heavy in my gut. It reminded me of another lie, from years ago. I made a bad investment and lost nearly $10,000 of our savings. I was so ashamed, I hid it from her for 6 months, pretending everything was fine, moving money around to cover the hole. I remember the sleepless nights, the constant fear of being discovered. The relief when I finally confessed was immense, but it had left a small crack in the foundation of our marriage. Is a lie ever justified? Where do you draw the line between protecting someone and just protecting yourself from shame? Let me know what you think in the comments. As I was leaving school, my mind a whirlwind of paranoia and guilt, my phone buzzed. It was the blocked number again. I expected another threat, another picture. But this was worse. It was a summons. The text read, "My father wants to meet you. School board office. Tomorrow. 4 p.m. Don't be late." My blood turned to ice. Robert Croft, the superintendent, wanted to see me. This was it. Julian wasn't just toying with me anymore, he was bringing out his most powerful weapon. This wasn't a back alley fight. This was a public execution. I was being called to the principal's office, but the principal was the king of the entire district. Refusing to go would be an admission of guilt. Going felt like walking into a trap from which I might never return. What was their plan? To fire me? To have me arrested in front of the people who ran my world? The tick-tock from the last message now made perfect sense. The lab results must be in, and Julian was ready to make his move. The open loop of the perfume test was about to be closed, and I was sure it would be around my neck. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I needed a plan, a countermove, but my mind was a blank wall of panic. I walked into the house to find Amelia sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open. The tense, accusatory energy from the night before was gone. It had been replaced by something else, something I couldn't quite read. Her face was pale. "Frank," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been doing some research." She sounded scared. "I looked up the perfume company," she said, not looking at me. "Just like you said, maybe it was a bad batch. But they've never had a recall. Not a single one in 50 years of business." My heart sank. My lie was falling apart. "But," she continued, finally looking up at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear, "I did find something else. I searched Julian's name." She turned the laptop towards me, her hand trembling. My eyes fell on the screen, and the world tilted on its axis. It was a news article from a local paper, dated 3 years ago. The headline was stark, "Real estate heir arrested in nightclub assault." The article detailed how Julian Croft had been arrested for spraying another man in the face with a chemical irritant during an argument. The charges were later dropped when the victim refused to testify. And below the headline, there was a picture. It was a mugshot. A younger, angrier Julian stared back from the screen, his eyes filled with a familiar, predatory rage. My revenge hadn't been an attack on an innocent victim. It had been an attack on a man with a history of using chemical weapons himself. This changed everything. I looked at Amelia, and for the first time, I think she was starting to realize that the monster in this story wasn't me. It was the man she had been secretly meeting in hotel rooms, the man who was now summoning me to his father's office. The man who was, at his core, a violent predator. And I had just given him a very good reason to come after me. The silence in our kitchen was a heavy, suffocating thing. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator as Amelia and I stared at the mugshot on her laptop screen. The face of Julian Croft, twisted into a contemptuous sneer, glared back at us. This was the man my wife had chosen over me. Not a charming, successful lover, but a violent predator with a police record. I looked at Amelia. The anger and suspicion in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, primal fear. For the first time since this nightmare began, we were looking at the same enemy. "Frank," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do? Tell me what you put in that bottle." She wasn't accusing me anymore. She was pleading. She needed to know the nature of the beast she had invited into our lives. I couldn't tell her the whole truth, not yet. But I gave her a piece of it. I wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain I felt, I said, my voice low. I wanted him to hurt. She nodded slowly, her fear of Julian now clearly greater than her anger at me. Our marriage was a ruin, but in that moment, a fragile, unspoken alliance was formed. We were two survivors in a wreckage of our own making. The old news article was a weapon, but a small one. It said the charges against Julian had been dropped when the victims suddenly refused to testify. Why would someone do that? Was he paid off, or was he threatened into silence? It showed that Julian wasn't just violent, he was protected. He was a man who believed he could do anything without consequences, because his father's power and money made him untouchable. And tomorrow, at 4 p.m., I was scheduled to walk into the king's castle to face the spoiled prince. I spent the rest of the night preparing for the meeting. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but now it was mixed with something else, a sliver of leverage. I printed out the news article. It wasn't much, but it was proof that Julian was not the innocent victim he was pretending to be. I knew I couldn't go into that meeting and just apologize. I was walking into a power play, and I had to be ready to play my only card. Have you ever had to face someone who holds all the power in a situation? How do you find the courage to stand up for yourself when you feel so small? I remembered the last time I saw Superintendent Croft in person, at a Teacher of the Year ceremony. He shook my hand, but his eyes were already looking past me, searching for someone more important to talk to. To him, I was nothing. A piece of furniture. A cog in his machine. This memory fueled me. He might see me as a nobody, but a nobody with nothing left to lose is a dangerous thing. I wasn't going into that office to beg for my job. I was going in there to survive. The next day, the drive to the school board office felt like the last drive of my life. The building was a modern fortress of glass and steel, designed to make you feel small and insignificant. I walked through the automatic doors, my heart pounding, the folded news article in my jacket pocket feeling as heavy as a stone. I was led into the superintendent's office. It was enormous, with a window that looked out over the entire city. And there they were. Robert Croft, a man who radiated cold, absolute power, sat behind a desk the size of a car. And in a chair in the corner, smirking, was Julian. His eyes were still red and swollen, but his arrogant smirk told me he was enjoying every second of this. Robert Croft did not waste time with pleasantries. He pushed a thin folder across the polished desk towards me. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is the preliminary lab report on the perfume. It identifies the primary compound as a concentrated oleoresin capsicum solution. The police also performed a quiet inventory check at your school this morning. A canister of law enforcement grade pepper spray is missing from your locked chemical cabinet." He had me. He had the means, the motive, and the evidence. It was checkmate. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the superintendent raised a single, commanding hand. Julian's smirk widened into a triumphant grin. "But," Robert Croft continued, his face an unreadable mask of stone, "we are not going to be pressing any charges." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. What did that mean? This wasn't about the police. This was something else. This wasn't an execution. It was a negotiation. The superintendent leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. His eyes were like chips of ice. My son has a problem, Mr. Miller. A problem with his temper. This little incident in the nightclub, it was a liability. But this new incident, this attack on him, it changes things. It makes him look like a victim. I finally understood. The open loop wasn't a noose, it was a leash. They weren't going to destroy me. They were going to use me. So here is what is going to happen, he said, his voice a low, threatening growl. You are going to do something for me. You are going to help us. Julian stood up and walked over to the window, looking down at the city like he owned it. He turned to me, his swollen eyes filled with a terrifying, gleeful light. You're going to help me clean up a little mess I made, he said. And if you don't, well, let's just say that pepper spray in your eyes will feel like a day at the beach compared to what I'll do to you and your wife. I stood in that silent, expensive office, a fly caught in a spider's web. The air was thick with the power these two men held over me. My one small act of revenge, the one thing I did to feel like I was in control, had backfired completely. It had given them all the control in the world. Julian's threat to my wife, Amelia, was the final turn of the screw. They knew I was not a monster. They knew I was a husband first. I had no choice. What do you need me to do? I asked, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My quiet life was over. I was now an employee of the monsters who had ruined it. Robert Croft, the superintendent, leaned back in his chair, a look of satisfaction on his face. My son, he began, is passionate. Sometimes that passion leads to mistakes. He explained that 2 weeks ago, there was a fire at an abandoned warehouse on the south side of town. The police suspected arson, but they couldn't find the source of the fire. Julian, in a fit of rage against the property owner, had been sloppy. He had used a unique, homemade chemical accelerant to start the blaze, and traces of it were still soaked into the concrete floor of the main room. A forensic sweep was scheduled in 48 hours. My task was simple. And impossible. They needed me, the high school chemistry teacher, to break into a police-taped crime scene. They needed me to analyze the chemical signature of the accelerant based on Julian's crude formula. Then, I had to create a neutralizing agent that would completely erase all traces of it. I had to clean up his crime, using the very skills that made me a good teacher, a good man. I was being blackmailed into becoming a criminal, forced to use my knowledge to hide a violent act. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The threat to Amelia was the chain around my neck. My foolish, desperate act of revenge had not just hurt her lover, it had put a target on her back. What would you do in that impossible situation? Would you risk going to prison for a crime you didn't even commit, just to protect your family from a direct and credible threat? Or would you call their bluff and pray they weren't as evil as they seemed? I knew they were. I had seen it in Julian's eyes. I had no choice but to obey. Robert slid a manila envelope across the desk. Inside was a map of the warehouse, a key to a side entrance, and a handwritten list of chemicals. It was Julian's formula for the accelerant. You have one night, Mr. Miller, the superintendent said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Get what you need from your school's lab. Do the job. And then we will all forget this ever happened. Your canister of pepper spray will be returned to the cabinet, and the lab results will be inconclusive. It was a deal with the devil, and my soul was the price of admission. I drove home in a fog, the manila envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a bomb. I was no longer a victim seeking justice. I was a pawn in their dirty game, a felon in training. The world seemed darker, the colors muted. When I got home, Amelia was waiting, her face a mess of fear and anxiety. I knew I couldn't protect her from this by lying. Our lies had already almost destroyed us. I sat her down at the kitchen table and I told her everything. The blackmail. The arson. The impossible task I had to complete by the next night. I told her that my revenge had put her life in danger. I thought of our wedding day. I remembered standing there, young and full of foolish certainty, promising to love, honor, and protect her from all harm. I had spent our entire marriage trying to be her shield. Now, because of my actions, I was the one who had led the wolves to her door. I had failed in my most sacred duty, not just as a husband, but as a man. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. I had never felt so weak and so ashamed in my entire life. Amelia listened to the whole sordid story without saying a word. I expected her to cry, to scream, to blame me for bringing this hell upon us. But she didn't. When I was finished, she was completely silent. Her face, which had been a mask of fear, hardened into something else. Something cold, focused, and practical. The fear was still there, but it was being channeled into a kind of ruthless clarity. She reached across the table and pulled the map towards her, her eyes scanning the layout of the warehouse. She looked at the address, and then her eyes went wide with a sudden, shocking recognition. "Frank," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "I know this building." I stared at her, confused. How could she know an abandoned warehouse on the other side of town? This warehouse, she said, her eyes locking onto mine, was the centerpiece of a massive redevelopment deal. My biggest competitor at the real estate agency was just days away from closing on it. The fire didn't just destroy a building, it destroyed her career. A cold realization washed over me. This wasn't just a random act of anger from a spoiled rich kid. This was a calculated move. I looked at the crude chemical formula Julian had written down. It was sloppy, but it was effective. And then I saw something else, something I had overlooked in my panic. At the bottom of the page, there was another name written next to Julian's, with a question mark beside it. The name was Dr. Evelyn Reed. The new school counselor. The woman with the knowing eyes. This mess wasn't just Julian's. He had help. Dr. Evelyn Reed. The name on the paper felt like a ghost haunting the room. The new school counselor, the one with the piercing eyes and the strange, knowing comments. She wasn't just a random person caught up in this. She was connected. But how? Was she another one of Julian's victims, blackmailed into helping him? Or was she something more? A partner? The architect of this entire nightmare? This open loop changed everything. We were no longer dealing with a spoiled kid and his powerful father. We were dealing with a conspiracy. Amelia's fear had transformed into a cold, hard focus. Her knowledge as a real estate agent gave us a new lens to look through. If Robert Croft is willing to commit felony arson to stop a competitor, she said, her voice low and steady, then he is not a man who leaves things to chance. This isn't just a cover-up, Frank. This is how they do business. In that moment, she wasn't my cheating wife anymore. She was my partner in survival. Our shared danger had forged a fragile, terrifying bond between us. The love was gone, but the instinct to protect each other remained. That night, I had to become a thief. I had to steal from the one place that had ever felt like a sanctuary, my school. I used my master key to let myself in long after the janitors had gone home. The empty hallways of Northwood High were eerie and silent, a ghost town of memories. This was where I had spent 25 years teaching kids about order and rules, about the beautiful logic of the universe. Now I was creeping through the shadows like a common burglar, my own rules shattered. I was about to violate the very heart of my own life. As I walked past the school's main office, a dangerous idea sparked in my mind. Dr. Reed. Her name on that paper was a question I had to answer. I couldn't go into that warehouse blind. I needed to know who I was really working for. So I took a detour. I picked the simple lock on the records office door, a skill I'd learned for a science demonstration years ago. I was breaking another rule, another law. Is it ever okay to break the rules to protect your family? I'm genuinely asking you all, because in that moment, I felt like I had already crossed a line from which I could never return. I found her personnel file. It was disappointingly thin. Her resume listed a degree from an obscure online university and her last job was as a private consultant. But then I found a pay stub, mistakenly included in the file. My blood ran cold. Dr. Evelyn Reed's salary was not being paid by the Northwood School District. It was being paid by a private company called Croft Enterprises. She didn't work for the school. She worked directly for Robert Croft. She was a plant, an agent placed inside the school for a purpose. Was she there to keep an eye on Julian? Or had she been placed there to watch me? The realization was terrifying. This conspiracy was more organized and went deeper than I could have imagined. I grabbed the chemicals I needed from my lab, my hands shaking, my mind reeling. Dr. Reed wasn't just a new counselor, she was a spy. Had she been watching me this whole time? Did she know about the perfume? Did she know about the affair before I did? Every polite smile, every seemingly innocent comment she had made now seemed like a calculated, sinister move in a game whose rules I didn't understand. I got home just before midnight, the stolen chemicals hidden in a toolbox. I told Amelia everything I had found. She listened, her face growing paler with every word. We were not up against a bully and his father. We were up against a corrupt, sophisticated machine that had its eyes and ears everywhere, even in the hallways of my school. We were out of our league, two ordinary people caught in the gears of something powerful and ruthless. My one act of revenge had pulled us into a whole other world of crime. I took the chemicals to the garage to begin mixing the neutralizing agent. It was a simple acid-base reaction, something I could do in my sleep. But as I measured the liquids, my hands trembled. This wasn't a classroom experiment. This was the act of erasing a felony. I was a criminal now, no better than them. Amelia stood watch at the garage door, her arms wrapped around herself, peering into the dark street. We were partners in this now, bound together not by love, but by a shared, desperate secret. I finished mixing the solution, pouring the clear, odorless liquid into a simple garden sprayer for easy application. My part of the devil's bargain was ready. As I screwed the lid on the sprayer, my phone buzzed. My heart leaped into my throat. I expected it to be Julian, another threat, another turn of the screw. But the number wasn't blocked. It was a local number I didn't recognize. I opened the text. It was a single, terrifying question that confirmed my worst fears. Did you find what you were looking for in my file, Mr. Miller? It was from her. Dr. Reed. She knew. She knew I had broken into the records office. She had been watching me the entire time. The text message glowed on my phone, a declaration of war from an enemy I had completely underestimated. She knows, I whispered to Amelia, my voice hollow. She's been watching me this whole time. The fear in the room became a living thing, a cold presence that settled over both of us. We were no longer just dealing with the brute force of Julian or the cold power of his father. We were up against a ghost, an intelligent, calculating player who was moving pieces on a board we were only just beginning to see. But the threat was still the same. The meeting was over, and the job still had to be done. Amelia, my wife who had lied to me for months, became my partner in crime. The affair, the lies, the heartbreak, it all seemed to feel small compared to the clear and present danger we now faced together. She insisted I leave my own phone at home. She gave me an old, untraceable burner phone from a drawer in her home office. For emergencies, she said, her face grim. As I prepared to leave, she put her hand on my arm. Frank, she said, just, come home. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something. A plea for the survival of the man she had wronged. The warehouse was in a dead part of the city, a skeleton of rusted steel and broken windows under a moonless sky. The police tape was a flimsy, pathetic barrier against the darkness that lived inside. I used the key Robert Croft had given me and slipped through a side door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air inside was thick with the ghosts of smoke and chemicals. It was the smell of a crime. Using a small blacklight I had taken from my lab, I scanned the floor. Just as they'd said, faint, glowing splatters of the accelerant covered the concrete like a sick, invisible painting. I began to work, spraying my neutralizing solution over the glowing patches. The chemical reaction was silent, erasing the evidence molecule by molecule. As I worked my way to the center of the room, my light fell on something metallic, half hidden under a piece of charred debris. It was a lighter. But not just any lighter. It was heavy, silver, and engraved with a fancy, ornate, see, the Croft family crest. Julian's arrogance had made him sloppy. He had dropped his signature at the scene of his crime. My first instinct was to destroy it, to erase it like the rest of the evidence. But another part of me, a new, colder part, whispered to keep it. If you found a weapon, a single piece of evidence that could turn the tables on the people who had you trapped, would you take it? Or would you play it safe and do exactly what you were told, hoping for mercy? Let me know what you think the right move is here. In that moment, I remembered a lesson I taught my students about crime scenes: a criminal always leaves something behind. This was what Julian had left. This was my leverage. My weapon. I slipped the heavy lighter into my pocket. Just as I sprayed the last of the glowing stains, I heard it. The crunch of gravel outside. A car door opening and closing. Headlights swept across the broken windows, casting long, dancing shadows through the cavernous room. My blood ran cold. This was it. A trap. They weren't going to let me just walk away. I dove behind a stack of burned pallets, my heart threatening to explode out of my chest. I held my breath and listened as the side door creaked open again. The footsteps were light. It was a woman. It was Dr. Reed. She walked calmly into the center of the room, her silhouette framed by the dim light from the doorway. She wasn't carrying a weapon. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like a teacher inspecting a student's work. "You can come out, Frank," she said, her voice echoing in the vast, empty space. "I'm not going to hurt you." Slowly, I rose from my hiding place. My mind was racing. Why was she here? Was she working with them, or was she here for another reason? Her presence was an open loop I couldn't even begin to understand. She gave me a small, unreadable smile. "You did a very thorough job," she said, gesturing to the clean floor. "You follow instructions well." The compliment felt like an insult. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She took a few steps closer, her intelligent eyes scanning my face. "I wanted to see you in your new element," she said. "And I wanted to make sure you understood that your arrangement with the Crofts isn't what you think it is. You haven't earned your freedom. You've just enlisted." I stared at her, completely lost. What did she mean? This was supposed to be the end of it, the one-time deal to save myself and my wife. She must have seen the confusion on my face, because her smile faded, replaced by a look of grim seriousness. "Robert Croft is a dangerous man," she said, "but he's predictable. Julian is a violent fool. They are not the real problem here, Frank. They are just the symptoms of the disease." The fear I felt was replaced by a profound confusion. If the people blackmailing me weren't the real problem, then who was? "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling. Dr. Reed looked around the burned-out warehouse, at the destruction that surrounded us. She gave a small, cold laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "The problem," she said, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity, "is what they were so desperate to cover up with this fire. This arson wasn't the crime, Mr. Miller. It was the evidence locker for a much, much bigger one. And you just burned it all away." The words hung in the burned-out shell of the warehouse, colder and more terrifying than the night air. "The arson wasn't the crime, Mr. Miller. It was the evidence locker. My mind struggled to catch up. I had been so focused on my own small, personal tragedy, so consumed by my simple act of revenge, that I had been completely blind. I had been a pawn in a game so large I couldn't even see the board. What bigger crime? I demanded, my voice a hoarse whisper. What was in this warehouse? Dr. Reed looked at me, her expression a mixture of pity and professional assessment. This building wasn't empty, Frank, she said, using my first name for the first time. It was where Robert Croft's manufacturing plants have been illegally dumping toxic chemical waste for over a decade. Barrels of it. The real estate deal Amelia told you about would have led to an environmental inspection. They would have been discovered. The fire wasn't just to stop a competitor, it was to incinerate the evidence of a crime that would send Robert Croft to prison for the rest of his life. My knees felt weak. I had been blackmailed into covering up an arson, which was itself a cover-up for a massive environmental crime. The layers of filth and deception were so deep I felt like I was drowning. Who are you? I asked, looking at the woman who was supposedly a simple school counselor. You don't work for Croft. Her lips curled into a small, cold smile. No. I work for the Environmental Protection Agency. I've been undercover for 2 years trying to build a case against him. I was placed in the school to get close to his weak link, Julian. She explained that my little revenge plot had been a chaotic, unexpected gift. It allowed the Crofts to believe they had a perfect pawn, a man they could control through blackmail. It gave them the confidence to use me to clean up their biggest mess. But you just told me I destroyed your evidence, I said, my confusion growing. I did, she confirmed, her eyes hardening. Which is why you are now my only way back in. They trust you, Frank. They think they own you. I need you to be my inside man. I need you to help me find the proof of where they moved the rest of those barrels. I was being offered a deal, another deal with another devil. This time, the devil wore the badge of the federal government. She offered me a choice, help her build a case against the Crofts, and she would guarantee full immunity for my pepper spray attack and for my actions tonight. She would make sure Amelia and I could disappear with new identities. If I refused, she would walk away and let the Crofts do whatever they wanted to me. Or, she added, she could just arrest me right now for tampering with a federal crime scene. This is the ultimate choice, isn't it? Do you trust a mysterious stranger who says she's one of the good guys and become a spy? Or do you run, knowing that a powerful criminal family will hunt you down for the rest of your life? What is the right call when both paths lead through hell? Let me know what you would have done. In my pocket, my fingers closed around the heavy, silver lighter I had stolen from the scene. This was my secret. My one piece of leverage that she didn't know about. It was the only thing that made me feel like I still had a choice. I left the warehouse with my head spinning, Dr. Reed's offer hanging over me. I had 24 hours to decide. I drove home through the sleeping city, the world feeling like a dream. I was no longer a chemistry teacher. I was a criminal accomplice being recruited to be an undercover informant. The simple man I used to be was dead and gone, and I didn't know who this new man was supposed to be. I rehearsed how I would explain this new, insane reality to Amelia. The danger had just increased tenfold. When I pulled into my driveway, the house was dark. Too dark. A cold dread, sharper than anything I had felt before, washed over me. I had left Amelia here, waiting for me. I burst through the front door, calling her name. Amelia. The silence that answered was absolute and terrifying. She was gone. I ran through the house, my heart pounding in my ears. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. But on the center of the kitchen table, there was a single sheet of photo paper, placed where I couldn't miss it. My hands trembled as I picked it up. It was a picture, taken just recently. It was Amelia. She was sitting in a chair, her hands tied behind her back, a piece of tape over her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror. And standing behind her, a triumphant, ugly smirk on his swollen face, was Julian Croft. He was holding something up to the camera, holding it right next to her tear-streaked cheek so there would be no mistake. It was the silver lighter with the Croft family crest. My one secret. My one piece of leverage. It was worthless. He knew I had taken it. He was showing me that he had my queen. The choice Dr. Reed had given me was gone. The game had changed once again. They didn't just want my help anymore. They wanted a trade. My silence and my cooperation, in exchange for my wife's life. The phone on the table buzzed. It was the burner phone Amelia had given me. A text from Julian. You have what's mine. Now I have what's yours. Let's make a deal. The picture of my wife, terrified and bound, broke something inside me. All the fear, the guilt, and the confusion burned away, leaving behind a single, cold, hard purpose. My revenge had started this, and I would be the one to finish it. My quiet, predictable life was a distant memory. I was no longer a victim or a pawn. I was a man with nothing left to lose, and that made me the most dangerous thing in their world. I picked up the burner phone and texted Julian back. Where? The reply was almost instant. Where it all started. Your school. The chemistry lab. Midnight. Come alone. The lighter for the girl. He wanted to finish this in my sanctuary. He wanted to rub my nose in the fact that he could corrupt every single part of my life. But the lab wasn't his territory. It was mine. I made one phone call. To Dr. Reed. I told her everything. The kidnapping. The trade. The location. She was silent for a long moment. They've made a mistake, she finally said, her voice cold as steel. They've chosen a battlefield where you are the expert. What's your plan, Frank? And just like that, I had a general, and she had her inside man. We were going to end this tonight. My plan was simple. It was chemistry. I wasn't a man of violence, but I was a man who understood chemical reactions. Before I left my house, I made a quick stop in my garage. I mixed 2 common, harmless household chemicals in a small, sealed container. Alone, they were nothing. But when mixed together, their reaction would be rapid and dramatic. It wouldn't hurt anyone, but it would create a massive, thick cloud of dense, disorienting fog. It was a smokescreen. A diversion. A way to change the rules of the game in an instant. I walked into the dark, silent halls of Northwood High at midnight. The place felt like a tomb. I entered my chemistry lab. They were all there. Julian and a large, scary-looking man stood over Amelia, who was tied to a chair. And sitting at my demonstration table, as if he owned the place, was Superintendent Robert Croft. The king himself had come to watch the final move. The lighter, Mr. Miller, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. A fair trade, I think. I looked at Amelia, at the terror in her eyes, and I knew what I had to do. I held up the silver lighter. Here it is, I said, walking slowly toward them. Let her go first. Julian laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. Not how this works, teach, he said, stepping forward to snatch the lighter from my hand. And that was the moment I had been waiting for. As he reached for the lighter, I dropped the small container I had hidden in my other hand. It shattered on the floor, and the 2 liquids mixed. The reaction was instantaneous. A loud hissing sound filled the lab, and a thick, white fog erupted from the floor, completely blinding everyone in the room. Chaos. Julian and his father were shouting, confused. The big man was stumbling around, unable to see. In that moment of pure panic, the lab doors burst open. Dr. Reed and a team of federal agents stormed the room. EPA. Nobody move, she yelled. I ran to Amelia, cutting her free with a utility knife from my pocket. In the swirling fog, I saw Julian lunge toward me in a blind rage. I sidestepped, and he stumbled past me, his hands crashing down onto a shelf of chemical beakers. A small, bright blue flame erupted, and he screamed as the fire burned his hand, searing the Croft family ring into his skin. In the end, justice was a simple matter of chemistry. Robert Croft, the powerful superintendent, was arrested by Dr. Reed, his empire of lies and poison set to crumble. Julian was taken away in an ambulance, his reign of terror over, a permanent mark of his failure burned onto his hand. Dr. Reed kept her promise. All charges against me were dropped. The official story was that I was a confidential informant who had bravely helped bring down a criminal enterprise. My name was cleared. Amelia and I stood outside the school as the sun began to rise. The love was gone, a casualty of all the lies and betrayal. But as we looked at each other, there was a new understanding. We had survived. We would go our separate ways, but we were not broken. We were free. I was no longer a teacher, but I had learned my greatest lesson. Even a quiet, simple man has a breaking point. And sometimes, the most powerful reaction comes from the most unexpected catalyst. This whole story started with a single act of revenge. In the end, do you think it was worth it? Was I a hero for exposing a great evil, or just a man who got lucky after making a terrible mistake? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. Thank you for following this journey. If you believe that everyone deserves justice and that even the quietest person has a voice, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you subscribe, because there are always more stories waiting in the shadows, ready for the light.